Further to my hypothesis that the race game is 5% pro-minority and 95% anti-white, here's a story about the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC. The CBC had a meeting with President Barack Obama at the White House on Tuesday. Quote from the news report. They discussed a range of topics including the economy, voting rights legislation, education, comprehensive immigration reform, youth employment, gun violence and anti-poverty programs, said a White House statement. End quote. Now, what caught my eye in that list of topics was the phrase comprehensive immigration reform. So the Congressional Black Caucus raised the amnesty bill with Barack Obama. What's their position on it? Their position is exactly what my hypothesis would predict. They totally support the bill. Quote from Representative Hank Johnson, fresh from his labours to prevent the capsizing of Guam. Quote, "It's good for African Americans and it's good for the nation." End quote. Translation, it's bad for Whitey, so it's fine with us, even though it floods the low end of the labour market with foreign workers, displacing a lot of poor blacks. The CBC isn't having this all its own way though. This coming Monday, July 15th, an organisation called the Black American Leadership Alliance, BALA. BALA is staging a march on Washington, D.C. The D.C. March for Jobs. Quote from their website, "If passed, the Gang of Eight's proposed immigration bill will be costly for all Americans, but will harm black American workers more than any other group." That goes totally against the narrative. Who are they, this Black American Leadership Alliance? Didn't they get the memo about the amnesty bill being the biggest stick-it-to-whitey campaign of the decade so far? Don't worry, the Anti-Defamation League has got their number. Quote from them, "BALA is just the latest incarnation of a shifting series of front groups for the anti-immigrant nativist group FAIR." That's FAIR, the Federation for American Immigration Reform, which has been trying for years to drive a wedge between African Americans and Latinos. End quote. See? It's all a sinister plot by the white devils to keep coloured folk down. Didn't you know it? Once that news gets out, I'm betting that the DC March for Jobs will be a flop, with no more than a few dozen dupes marching. That'll be a relief to Hank Johnson anyway. He was worried that if too many people turned up, Washington DC might tip over and be swallowed by the Potomac. Nothing much else has been happening on the immigration front. The amnesty bill is currently in limbo. It's passed out of the Senate, but the House has not yet taken it up, or decided not to take it up. John Boehner will sell the pass if he can, no doubt weeping as he does so.
You feel better if you cry.
But Conservative members of the House majority are already showing signs of resistance, so we shall see. Actually, about 3/4 of the arguments made by immigration boosters can be countered with a single word. No, not the word that begins with a B and ends with a T. No, I'm thinking of another word. The word is California. It's sad to listen to people who grew up in the Golden State 40 or 50 years ago in the California of the Beach Boys and American graffiti, the state back then was less crowded, less expensive, less diverse, and way better governed. Geezer nostalgia should always be taken with a grain of salt, but on the numbers they seem to have a point here. Crowding, for example. In 1970, there were 20 million Californians in residence. That number has well nigh doubled. The rate of increase there is much higher than for the USA as a whole, which has grown by only a bit more than a half since 1970. That wouldn't matter so much if a lot of the land wasn't spoken for as desert or mountain. The coastal strip and the Central Valley are where people want to live, and those regions have all they can handle. When you think of California disasters, you think of earthquakes, but in fact drought is a bigger threat to the state. There was a nasty one in the late 1980s. They were bringing water in from Canada using converted oil tankers. There'd been another one in the mid-1970s. And further back in history, there were mega droughts lasting for decades. One of them, in the Middle Ages, lasted for 220 years. Then there's the diversity. As Radio Derb always tells you, diversity is like salt in your stew. A little improves the flavour. Too much and you're in Yugoslavia. A nation which, just to remind you, no longer exists. The demographics of California have been completely transformed since 1970. The black percentage has been the most constant, just declining a tad from 7 to 6.5%. The Hispanic percentage has nearly tripled, from 13% to 38%. Asian has almost quintupled, from 3% to 14%. And no, that's not all Silicon Valley software geeks from Taiwan. In the farmlands of the Central Valley, the most commonly spoken languages are, in order, English, Spanish, and Hmong. Hmong. Demographic losers have been the non-Hispanic whites, from 76% in 1970 to less than 40% today. So the proportion has pretty much halved. That crowding and that diversity are, of course, mostly a consequence of unrestrained immigration. 55% of children in Los Angeles County have immigrant parents. Now, if you listen to the immigration boosters, this should have done wonders for California. Pepping up the economy, funding the entitlements, dynamic young immigrants bursting with entrepreneurial zeal and cultural vibrancy, their energy driving California way out ahead of the sluggish, less diverse, non-California USA that has not been so blessed with so much immigration. Except that hasn't happened. Not at all. Quote, "What was once the most prosperous state now suffers from an unemployment rate far steeper than the nation's, and a flood of firms and jobs escaping high taxes and stifling regulations. This toxic combination, high public sector employee costs and sagging economic fortunes, has produced recurring budget crises around the state." End quote.